This is Hanoi, the capital city of Vietnam. Though it may not seem as impressive as Tokyo or Beijing, this city has its own story in the air. If you walk around this city, you'll find people riding scooters and cars, buying and selling everything from phones to food in their countless small shops, rushing to and fro to get to school or work. You can simply feel the boundless energy everywhere, and it gives out one message: no matter what you throw at us, we will continue to grow. All this makes sense because just 30 years back, Vietnam used to look something like this. It was one of the poorest nations in the world, and in mere 3 decades, it transformed to become a middle-income country. After China, Vietnam has shown the fastest economic growth among all Asian countries since 1986. And even during the pandemic, due to Vietnam's quick response and early containment, allowed Vietnam to quickly reopen businesses and is now expected to be the world's fastest growing economy this year. What's even more impressive is the fact that despite global trade is declining and countries taking more protective stance, Vietnam still has export surplus, which is also growing each passing year.
Vietnam has truly become one of the great miracles of the world. There is nothing more impressive.
Vietnam has achieved enormous progress.
But what's the miracle behind Vietnam's unusual growth? And can Vietnam be the next China? Just like Korea, Japan, and China, who opened their economy to trade and investment, liberalized their domestic laws for ease of doing businesses, and became manufacturing export powerhouses, Vietnam too followed the similar path to economic growth. But at the same time, it was different because it lacked all the post-World War or the boom's years advantages which the former Asian countries had, as the era of rapid globalization with growing trade and investment flow was over. The original Asian leaders during their early years produced an annual export growth close to 20%, nearly double the average for low or middle income nations at the time. Vietnam has sustained a similar pace for 3 decades. Even as the global trade slumped in the year 2010, Vietnam's export grew at 16% year after year, by far the fastest rate in the world and 3 times the emerging world's average. While other emerging countries spend heavily on social welfare in an effort to appease voters, Vietnam, being a responsible communist, diverts most of its resources to its export, road building, and ports to get goods overseas, and lastly on human resource by building schools to educate workers. The government invests about 8% of GDP each year on new building projects, and at the same time steer foreign investments from countries like China and Korea in building plant and infrastructure in Vietnam. Meanwhile, if you are interested in knowing what's going around the world and make sense out of it, then do subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon below. Now coming back, in a protectionist era, Vietnam is also a trend-bending communist champion of open borders, a signatory to more than a dozen free trade agreements. And this way, Vietnam has become a favorite destination for all the export manufacturers. Also, in recent years, China's rising wages, US-China trade war, and breaking of China's supply chain due to pandemic have played in favor of Vietnam. Many Chinese manufacturers have either shifted to or at least considering Vietnam as a backup option. This brings us to the question, can Vietnam be the next China? A very short answer would be no. Even though there are so many similarities between these two countries and their economic model, Vietnam can never be China. Don't get me wrong here, Vietnam can be very advanced and developed, probably like Japan and South Korea, but never like China. And this is simply because it's too small. China is 29 times bigger than Vietnam, and China has a workforce of 806 million people, while Vietnam in comparison has only 55 million. Now, Vietnam is well and good if you're planning to establish a factory of, let's say, 500 people. But if you're planning to set up a large-scale manufacturing units like that of China of 100,000 people, it becomes very, very difficult. What's more, Vietnam is not a resource producer. That means even though it has the infrastructure, most of the raw material needs to be purchased outside of Vietnam, like from China, which further raises the production cost. Also, when you're considering moving your factory to Vietnam, one needs to consider both the domestic demand and the overseas demand. While in China, domestic demand alone will be sufficient for profits, the same is not true for Vietnam. Everything said, one can never be too sure of future. But one thing that we can be sure of is that the people of Vietnam will keep working hard and exporting their way to prosperity.